We are moving on with our study in Luke. If you open your Bibles, there's some Bibles in the seats in front if you don't have one. We're in chapter 17, starting at verse 11. Starting in verse 11, it says, "Now, on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. And as he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, 'Jesus, Master, have pity on us.' When he saw them, he said, 'Go show yourselves to the priests.' And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw that he was healed, he came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, 'Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?' Then he said to him, 'Rise and go. Your faith has made you well.'" You know, this story starts out really a very tragic scene. These 10 guys who are outcast. They're outcast because they have an infectious disease. They're outcast with no hope of a cure. Outcast, no participation in regular life. They live outside the city. They have no relationships, no job, no money, no food. They're outcasts with no hope of a normal life. And thankfully today we don't treat disease this way. I think the closest thing we have, or we can think of, that looks like this is probably the homeless today. I was driving by a homeless guy the other day, and he hadn't bathed in a long time. He looked disheveled. He was mumbling to himself. He was wearing a Starbucks coffee sleeve on his wrists, He was clearly out of it. And in our world, they are the outcasts. They're people you see in society, but they're not part of society. And the homeless, it seems today, they're probably out. They're in that situation because of mental illness or drug abuse or choice. They are outcast in our society by circumstances. But these 10 that we're looking at this morning, these guys are outcast by law. Let's look at Leviticus. It talks about the leper. Chapter 13, verse 45 says, "The person with such an infectious disease must wear torn clothes. Let his hair be unkempt, cover the lower part of his face, and cry out, 'Unclean, unclean.' As long as he has the infection, he remains unclean. He must live alone. He must live outside camp." This is one of those Jewish laws that sounds like a health code. And that's really what it is. It's an infectious disease, and it's an attempt to quarantine people so that the whole town doesn't get the disease. Leprosy is contagious, but because of this law, and because of the time that Jesus lives, leprosy is something far more serious, if you will, far more dark than simply a disease. It's really viewed as a judgment of God, as many diseases in Jesus' days, but leprosy in particular. And even through history, it was often looked at that way, because the thing about it is it's contagious, but when people contract it, they hold it in incubation for a certain period of time, sometimes months, sometimes years, sometimes decades. Sometimes people won't manifest the disease for 20 years. So throughout history, when people would have the disease, they couldn't tie it to any exposure, actually, because it had just been too long. So in particular, leprosy feels like a judgment of God because it seems to come out of the blue. And it's very terrifying, It's scaly skins, and they use kind of a picture of it now. It distorts the skin. Ultimately, fingers and toes fall off. Not really because of leprosy, but because of a secondary infection, but that's how they viewed it. It was really a pretty horrifying thing in the ancient world. And that's what these guys are. That's what they have. They're outcasts. They're outside the city. But in the first verse, Luke makes a point of telling us where we are. And he says, "Now on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee." Jesus is on the edge of forbidden territory. He is from Galilee, which is Jewish territory. And he's on the edge of Samaria, which is forbidden for a devout Jew, because they are non-believers. In fact, they're worse than non-believers. They've taken the true Jewish faith and they've distorted it and twisted it such that it's not a true faith any longer. And Luke interestingly enough, doesn't answer a really significant question here. And that is, Jesus is going to go into a village, but you don't know what kind of village it is. Is it a Jewish town? Is it a Samaritan town? Remember, this is a border road, so that means on the right-hand side, if there's a town, that's a Samaritan town. On the left-hand side, that's a Jewish town. And Luke doesn't let us know that little fact. So, and let me back up and tell you something about Luke. I've had trouble with Luke. I am a consummate skeptic. And Luke was not an eyewitness. And so for years, I would just look at the Gospel of Luke. I'm a skeptic. I've told you guys before how I'm an accountant. Actually, the truth of the matter is, I am the worst kind of accountant. I am trained as an auditor. And an auditor is trained to think. Every time you speak, I think you're lying. So that's kind of my skeptic. That's my baseline. Okay? And I'm preaching again. It's actually been helpful for me, believe it or not, because it forces me to dig. So I was reading this book, because I have this trouble with Luke. I was reading this book that was explaining how Luke put his gospel together. And actually, Luke was not an eyewitness, but Luke was alive when all the eyewitnesses were alive. And we know the 12 followed Jesus every day. But also, the Bible really tells us there's a bigger crowd that followed Jesus most of the time. And it's a lot of people. Somewhere between 70 and maybe 120 people were an entourage around Jesus pretty much all the time. And Luke has access to all these people. So Luke wasn't here at this scene, but Luke interviewed a whole bunch of people about this scene. And it's actually really significant this morning, because if we were reading the Gospel of Matthew or John, and we came to this line and it said, well, he went into a town and he's on the border, could be Samaritan, could be Jewish, we would think, oh, well, Matthew or John, they were there, just like us, they might just have been a detail they didn't remember. But Luke, because he interviewed a whole bunch of people to come up with his story, we know Luke knew. Luke knows if it's a Jewish town or a Samaritan town. And he specifically excludes it from his story. And we're going to find out a little bit later as we study. It's really significant that he leaves it out. And it's really significant that he tells us what's on the border. You know it's one side or the other. I'll leave that there for now. So, if it's a Jewish town, just to give you one aspect, it's a Jewish town, you know it's fiercely Jewish, fiercely religious. The Jews hated the Samaritans, they hated the Romans, they hated anything non-Jewish. If it's a Samaritan town, on the other hand, they believe they're Jews. They trace their heritage back to Abraham. But they've taken the faith and they've twisted it. And the twisted faith is now 1,000 years old. If we were to make an analogy to today, it's a little bit like the Mormons or the Jehovah's Witnesses. They took the core of Christianity and they twisted it such that it's no longer Christian. And that's what the Samaritans did. And with the Mormons or the Jehovah's Witnesses, you know, the church in the 1840s, the 1850s, when those things popped up, they weren't really too terribly concerned. But, you know, it's been 150, 160 years. There's a certain social legitimacy that happens when a religion's around for a long period of time. I mean, who knows? Even one of those guys might run for president. The Samaritans have been around with their faith for 1,000 years. This is why there's so much animosity between the two groups. They both feel they have legitimacy. In the history of the Samaritans, 1,000 years before, King Solomon, the wisest man, the richest man who ever lived, he falls away from God. And as a judgment, God says, I'm going to rip the kingdom in two. So after Solomon dies, 10 tribes of the Jews, they split off from the main part of Israel, the 2 tribes in the south. And a man named Jeroboam becomes king. And he's got a political problem on his hands. It's kind of a religious and political problem. What's he going to do with all the people in his new kingdom that have to go and legitimately worship Yahweh at Jerusalem? It's the only place to legitimately worship God. He's got this problem on his hands. Well, 1 Kings 12 outlines what he does with this problem. It says, Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom will return to the house of David, If these people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will return to their Lord, even to Rehoboam, king of Judah. And they will kill me and return to Rehoboam, king of Judah. So the king consulted and made 2 golden calves, and he said to them, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold, your gods, O Israel, that brought you up out of the land of Egypt." Just a twist that nullifies the whole faith. Neither of these sides like each other, based upon that. Let's go on. Verse 12. So as Jesus was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." Pity. Wow. Have pity. Of course. The word means compassion. Their prayer to Jesus is, "Jesus, feel something about our situation. Have compassion on us." And I love what they call him. They call him Master. It's a little unique for the Gospels. Lots of times when people address Jesus, they address him as Rabbi. Especially the Pharisees, they address him as Rabbi, as it means teacher. The Pharisees are teachers themselves. When they address Jesus as Rabbi, they're calling him on an equal platform, which is kind of ironic in a way. Here Jesus feeds 5,000 people from 2 fish and some scraps of bread, and heals incurable diseases like blindness, and raises the dead. And the Pharisees look at him and say, "Yeah, he's pretty much equal with us." And then I'm going to debate with him and try to make him lesser than us. They start out calling him Rabbi usually. These guys don't. He's not their teacher in this moment. He's their Lord. The word is Lord, Master, Commander. It's a word of submission. So they don't need teaching at this point in time. They don't need to debate anything. They need a Lord and Master. And I think in Christianity, especially evangelicalism, we get a little confused on the title of Jesus, I think. We do a great job of letting people know that Jesus is our friend. And that he is. He is our friend. Of course he's our friend. He loves us. He walks with us throughout our whole lives. He walks with us in our sorrows. He rejoices with us in our joys. But for me, I really need Jesus to be more than just my friend. And I have fantastic friends. I praise God on a daily basis for my friends. My wife at the top of the list, of course. But God's also blessed me with these people in my life that are just so patient with me and so kind to me, loyal. I'm really blessed with great friends. But the truth is, for walking through this life, I need more than that. I need more than just a friend. See, my friends can't answer my prayers or heal my deepest hurts. My friends can't guide me. They can advise me. They can't choose the path that's best for me and then make it happen. My friends can't control my circumstances. And as much as I feel loved by my friends, they cannot transform me or my life. I need much more than just a friend in Jesus. And I think some Christians, we get stuck here. We understand Jesus as our friend, but that's kind of where it ends. And I think that leads to a lot of misunderstanding and confusion. I hear complaints, about a defeated life, or about, God doesn't seem to be present in my life, or he just doesn't seem to answer my prayers. And I can tell you for myself, after 30 plus years of walking with God, I have never had an unanswered prayer. Just sometimes the answer is no. And that's, I think, where the confusion is. See, if I ask my friends, they always say yes. If my friends have the ability to help me out, they always say yes. Without question. They're loyal, faithful, kind friends. So my friends always say yes. And I think we do this kind of weird math in our minds. When Jesus is our friend, and I know my friends, if they have the ability to help me out, they will say yes. Jesus has ultimate ability. Therefore, he's supposed to say yes. And that can easily lead you to, well, I wonder why he didn't say yes. You're not my friend. Let me give you a hypothetical to make my point. If I came in this morning and I said, last night, I was ushered in throne room of heaven. And I stood before the throne of God, and the angels were singing, and the brilliance of light, and the colors, and the crystal sea, everything you read about in the book of Revelations, I was there. And God ushered me into that point, and He said, I brought you here to answer your prayer. And your answer is no. I think half the evangelical world would go, bummer. Did you do something wrong? You know, some of my crazy prayers, I thank God my God says no. He is my friend, but He's got to say no. I need Jesus to be way more than my friend. And these 10 guys here, they get that. They don't need a friend in Jesus right now. They need a Lord. They need a master. And they engage Him as Lord and Master. Look at verse 14. Here's His reaction to their prayer. When He saw them, He said, "Go, show yourselves to the priests." It's really an interesting response for Jesus in context of the rest of the Gospels. Most of the time when He heals people, He interacts with them. You know, He sometimes asks them, "Well, what do you want me to do for you?" He doesn't ask these guys that. Or sometimes He touches them. Oftentimes He touches people who He heals. But these guys, He just says, "Well, go show yourselves to the priest." And it's kind of, really? It has some context to it. It's actually in Leviticus. There's something about showing yourself to the priest for a leper. It's Leviticus 14. It says, "Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, This shall be the law of the leper in the day of his cleansing. Now he shall be brought to the priest, and the priest shall go out to the outside of the camp. Thus the priest shall look, and if the infection of leprosy has been healed in the leper, then the priest shall give orders to take 2 live clean birds, and cedar wood, and scarlet string, and hyssop for the one who is to be cleansed." And it goes on to this really cool sacrificial ceremony that they do, where they sacrifice one bird in thanks to God, and they let another bird go free as a symbol of the new freedom that the leper has. Really, it's very praise-oriented, very cool ceremony that they're supposed to go through. The problem is, you're supposed to do that after you're healed. These guys aren't healed. Jesus says, "Go to the priest." But they come to the master. Go to the priest. And really surprisingly, they go. I think they really exercise a lot of faith here. They go. And what's interesting about it is Jesus is asking them to break the law, because they're supposed to stay outside the city while they have the disease. So now they walk through the city gates. They have to walk past the guards, whatever guards they have there. Nobody wants to touch them, but I'm sure people are telling them, "You get back outside." As they walk down these narrow streets in the ancient world, I'm sure people are moving out of the way. They're horrified that these lepers are now moving into the city. And somewhere along the way, they get healed. Somehow. We don't know what happened to the other 9. They probably proceeded forth to the priest to go through the sacrificial thanksgiving. But one of them is so overwhelmed with joy and thanks that he runs back to Jesus. Look what happens in verse 15. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked Him, and he was a Samaritan. Make special note that this guy's a Samaritan. And again, Luke hasn't told us what kind of town they're in, but he makes special note. This guy's a Samaritan. One of the rejected unbelievers. You know, the Jew, at this point in time, reading Luke's gospel back in the first century, he's going to go, wait a minute. Why did this guy get healed at all? He's an unbeliever. And Luke doesn't answer this question as to what town they're in. He was purposely not answering it. So let's dig into that a little bit. If it's a Jewish town, it's highly religious. The men are quarantined according to law. Their disease is also viewed as a judgment from God because of something they did wrong or because something that their parents did wrong. Furthermore, if it's Jewish, this Samaritan is not welcome at all. Whether he's clean or unclean, whether he's got leprosy or not. We don't know. We don't know if it's Jewish. On the other hand, if it's Samaritan, you actually have a bigger problem on your hands. If it's Samaritan, then Jesus actually told these 10 guys to go to a priest of idolatry and give a sacrifice to an idolatrous God. Really? This question could have been easily resolved by Luke, and it's not, and it's specifically not, because we're supposed to wrestle with this. What religious side is this story on? What if God wants to bless the unbeliever? What if God wanted to heal the unbeliever, the Mormon? And what if he wants to heal the unbeliever, even if the unbeliever goes on unbelieving? I mean, what kind of God does this kind of thing? Well, maybe it's the kind of God we've been reading about, who takes the prodigal, who's completely shamed the father, and takes him back. Maybe it's the kind of God that when, like the estate owner, when he's being cheated by his manager, he doesn't even bring it up. Maybe it's the kind of God that on a religious day, he decides that it's more important to heal the woman who was stooped over of a man with a withered hand. And Jesus reacts to this Samaritan in verse 17. Jesus asks, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" It's a funny thing here. Jesus is praising someone for disobeying Moses' laws. And he's saying this guy who didn't go and follow through with the praise ceremony is actually the one who's praising God. Now whether it's Jewish or non-Jewish, it's the bottom line here. Only one of them came back to Jesus. Only one of them wanted to thank Jesus. Again, Jesus makes special note, was no one found to return and praise God. Jesus, the whole priestly ceremony was about praising God. Possibly the other 9 did that. Why does Jesus object? This guy is overwhelmed. He's overwhelmed at what the Master has done. And he runs back and he just can't control himself. He drops to his knees and thanks the healer, the Master, and really calls him God by this action and praises him. And Jesus acknowledges that this is a praise to God. Look what Jesus says to him then in verse 19. Then he said, "Rise and go, your faith has made you well." It's a common theme throughout the scriptures, throughout the gospel. Jesus, after he heals someone, he tells someone, it's your faith that made you well. And 10 of them, really, they had faith to make them well. They had healing faith, all 10 of them. But the word well is an interesting word. When Jesus says it, your faith made you well, it's actually the word saved. It actually says your faith has saved you. Your faith has saved you from a life without God. Your faith has saved you for a life with God. This passage raises a bunch of questions on the religious lines. 9 guys had healing faith. 1 guy had a saving faith. 9 guys did the right thing and went to the priest. Basically, Jesus says they did the wrong thing. They did the right thing, but it didn't develop for them saving faith. And what's more, and probably the most problematic of this whole passage, the guy who gets healed, the guy who has saving faith, is the Mormon. He's the guy who has his theology completely messed up. That's a problematic passage. Let me be clear on something. Any Mormon who religiously follows their religion cannot possibly find saving faith. Likewise, any Samaritan who religiously follows their faith cannot find saving faith. But we've just read about this guy. He didn't follow his religion. And it's also true in this context, because Jesus says it to the Pharisees many times, that anybody who religiously follows the Pharisaical line becomes twice the son of hell as the Pharisees are. Bottom line in the story is religion is done. It didn't work anyway. Religion is called the law in the book of Galatians. Religion is the tutor to Christ. It's a very common theme in Christianity. The law is the tutor to Christ. It really means religious rules. trying to do something to make God happy with you. It's actually a tutor to Christ. We never really think through how that works. It tutors us by completely frustrating us. Because it doesn't work. And this guy found something that did work. See, Luke leaves it out as to whether this is a Jewish town or a Samaritan town, what religion this is setting on, because it completely doesn't matter. When Jesus told these guys to go see the priest, they were never supposed to work there. One guy understood. They were never supposed to make it to the priest, whether it was a Jewish priest or a Samaritan priest. They were never supposed to make it there. They were supposed to be so overwhelmed with what God has done for them that they come back to the feet of Jesus. Essence of the gospel. You know, there's a spattering of people in here this morning. Some of us don't have our theology straight. All of us don't have it completely straight. That's why we gather. That's why we talk through these things. Some of us are confused by our faith, worried about God's approval, confused whether He cares, is He answering prayer. And almost all of us are asking, what should we do? I love the answer that this passage gives. What we should do is be overwhelmed and spend the rest of our lives thanking God. Let's pray. Father, thank you. Thank you. Thank you that you are the Lord and Master of our lives. And that you guide us. You protect us. You watch over us. You direct us, and when we need it, you say no. Thank you, Father, that we can trust you. And Lord, teach us to be overwhelmed with the love